January 30th, 1969. 3rd Savile Row, London, 12:30 p.m. Paul McCartney stood on the rooftop of Apple Corps headquarters, staring at the gray London sky. In 30 minutes, they would plug in their instruments and play what nobody knew would be the Beatles' final public performance. But Paul had a feeling, a cold, sinking feeling, that this wasn't just another concert. The wind whipped through his hair as he watched the setup crew position the amplifiers. George Martin wasn't here. Nobody from the press knew this was happening. This was supposed to be spontaneous, raw, honest, the way it used to be. Paul's mind drifted to Hamburg, 1961. 4 young lads crammed into the tiny Kaiser Keller Club, playing 8-hour sets until their fingers bled. They had nothing then except each other, and an impossible dream. John would make him laugh between songs with his ridiculous voices and impressions. They'd share cigarettes and stolen moments of pure musical telepathy that felt like magic. Now, 8 years later, they had everything. Fame, fortune, screaming crowds across the globe. But somewhere along the way, they'd lost the thing that mattered most. They'd lost each other. Paul pulled his coat tighter against the wind. Below, London bustled on, oblivious to the fact that history was about to be made on this rooftop. He wondered if the office workers in the surrounding buildings would even care. The Beatles had become so much bigger than music. They were a brand, a phenomenon, a cultural institution. When had they stopped being just 4 friends who loved to play together? "You're up there early." John's voice cut through the wind. Paul turned to see Lennon climbing the last few steps onto the rooftop, his guitar case in hand. They hadn't spoken much lately. Not really spoken. The business meetings, the recording sessions, even their conversations had become formal, distant. "Wanted to see the view," Paul said simply. John set down his case and walked to the edge, looking out over London. "Quite a view for our last stand." Paul's stomach dropped. Last stand. John said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "Last stand?" Paul tried to keep his voice light. "This is just a concert, John. A bit of fun." John turned to face him. Those eyes, once warm with shared dreams and inside jokes, now held something Paul didn't recognize. Resolution, maybe? Or resignation? Is it Paul? Is this really just a bit of fun? Before Paul could answer, George and Ringo emerged onto the rooftop with the film crew. The moment was broken, but the tension remained, hanging in the air like smoke. 1 p.m. The cameras were rolling. They opened with "Get Back," and for a moment, Paul felt the magic returning. 4 lads from Liverpool, playing together like they had 1,000 times before. The sound echoed across the London rooftops, drawing office workers to their windows, stopping traffic in the street below. But during "Don't Let Me Down," Paul noticed something. John was changing the lyrics. Subtle changes, but Paul knew every word John had ever written. Instead of singing about needing somebody to love, John was singing directly to Yoko, who stood at the edge of the rooftop with her camera. Paul's fingers tightened on his bass strings. This was supposed to be about the band, about the Beatles, not about her. They finished the song to scattered applause from the growing crowd below. John set down his guitar and walked to the microphone. "Thank you," John said to the crowd. "This next one's for my wife." Paul felt something snap inside him. Wife. They weren't even officially married yet, and John was dedicating Beatles songs to her, on what was supposed to be their comeback. As John began the opening chords to "I've Got a Feeling," Paul made his decision. When they finished, he was going to say something. The song ended. The crowd cheered. John smiled and waved, then turned to Paul. "Beautiful, wasn't it?" John said, his eyes bright with something Paul hadn't seen in months. Happiness. Paul walked over to where John stood, away from the microphones. The cameras were still rolling, but they couldn't pick up what was about to be said. "John, can we talk for a minute?" "Sure, Paulie. What's on your mind?" Paul took a breath. "Is this about the music, or is this about her?" John's smile faded. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You changed the lyrics to 'Don't Let Me Down.' You dedicated a song to her. This is the Beatles, John, not John and Yoko, featuring some session musicians." John's jaw tightened. "Session musicians? Is that what you think George and Ringo are?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Do I?" "Because, lately, it seems like you think you're the only one who knows what the Beatles should be." They were speaking in low, tense voices, but George and Ringo could sense the tension. They exchanged glances and moved closer. "I think the Beatles should be the four of us," Paul said. "Not the four of us plus whoever we're sleeping with." John stepped closer. "That's rich, coming from you. You think I haven't noticed Linda in every recording session? You think I don't see her whispering in your ear about which songs should be singles? Linda doesn't try to change our music, doesn't she? Maybe I'm amazed? The Long and Winding Road? Those songs are love letters to her, Paul. Don't pretend you haven't been writing for an audience of one." Paul felt heat rising in his chest. "At least I'm not letting my girlfriend sing on our albums." John's face darkened. "Revolution 9 was art, Paul, but you wouldn't understand that. You're too busy trying to be the cute Beatle, writing little ditties about holding hands. And you're too busy trying to be an avant-garde genius to remember why people fell in love with us in the first place." John laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I remember. I remember when you used to care about pushing boundaries. Now all you want to do is write songs that sound like songs we wrote 5 years ago. And all you want to do is alienate everyone who's ever loved us." Paul's voice cracked slightly on the last words. He was thinking about the fans who still waited outside his house, the young girls who cried when they heard Yesterday, the boys who learned guitar because they wanted to be Beatles. Were they really going to throw all of that away? John heard the emotion in Paul's voice, and for a moment, his expression softened. Paul saw a flash of the old John, his friend, his partner. But then John's face hardened again, the walls going back up. "Maybe they love an idea of us that doesn't exist anymore, Paul. Maybe we're just living in a museum of what we used to be." The words hung between them like a death sentence. George shifted uncomfortably, while Ringo stared down at his drumsticks, as if they held the answers to questions nobody wanted to ask. They were facing each other now, voices rising despite their efforts to keep this private. George stepped forward. "Lads, maybe we should—" "Stay out of this, George," John snapped, not taking his eyes off Paul. "Don't talk to him like that," Paul said. "Like what? Like he's not the leader of the group? Because he's not, Paul. Neither are you. Neither am I anymore." The words hit Paul like a physical blow. What's that supposed to mean? John looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but somehow more devastating. "It means this isn't working, Paul. We're not working. We haven't been working for a year, maybe longer. We're just going through the motions. We just played 3 songs that sounded incredible." Did we? Or did we play 3 songs while thinking about how much we don't want to be here with each other? Paul opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because John was right. Standing here, 30 feet above London, Paul realized he'd spent the entire performance thinking about the next solo album he wanted to make. About the songs he'd written that John would never understand. About the creative freedom he'd have if he didn't have to compromise with 3 other people. "So what are you saying?" Paul asked quietly. John looked out over the London skyline, then back at Paul. "I'm saying maybe it's time to stop pretending." "John, Ringo's voice was soft, concerned. John held up a hand. No, Ringo. We all know it. We've all felt it. We're different people than we were in Hamburg. We want different things. Paul felt something breaking inside his chest. Not just his heart, but something deeper. The dream they'd shared since they were teenagers. The belief that they could conquer the world together. If this is how you feel, Paul said, his voice barely above a whisper, then why are we here? Why are we doing this? John was quiet for a long moment. Because we're Beatles, and Beatles finish what they start. Paul nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't a concert. It was a funeral. They played 4 more songs. I've Got a Feeling, One After 909, Dig a Pony, and finally, Get Back Again. Paul sang every word, played every note, but part of him had already left the rooftop. Part of him was already thinking about what came next, but there was something else happening as they played. Despite everything that had been said, despite the anger and the hurt, the music was still there. When John's guitar harmonized with Paul's bass during I've Got a Feeling, it was like they were 17 again, sitting in John's bedroom at Mendips, discovering they could create something beautiful together. For those fleeting moments between the arguing, they were still the Beatles. Paul found himself watching John's hands as they moved across the fretboard. Those hands had written, "Help," and "Strawberry Fields Forever," and "A Day in the Life." Those hands had shaped half of Paul's musical DNA. How do you walk away from that? How do you say goodbye to someone who knows your musical soul better than you do yourself? During Get Back, the police arrived. They needed to shut down the concert because of noise complaints. The perfect ending, Paul thought. The authorities breaking up the Beatles one last time. Just like Hamburg, just like the Cavern, just like every other time they'd been too loud, too wild, too much for the grown-ups to handle. As they unplugged their instruments, Paul felt the weight of finality settling over the rooftop like fog. This was it. No more late-night recording sessions. No more arguments about which songs should go on which side of the album. No more shared looks across the studio when they hit a perfect harmony. No more Beatles. As they unplugged their instruments, Paul felt the weight of finality settling over the rooftop like fog. This was it. No more late-night recording sessions. No more arguments about which songs should go on which side of the album. No more shared looks across the studio when they hit a perfect harmony. No more Beatles. John walked over to where Paul stood, his Rickenbacker still slung over his shoulder. For a moment, they just stood there. 2 men who had shared everything and lost it all in the span of 8 years. For what it's worth, John said quietly, it was magical while it lasted. Paul looked at his songwriting partner, his musical brother, his best friend, his harshest critic. Behind John's defensive exterior, Paul could see the scared kid from Liverpool, who had lost his mother too young, who had found family in music and friendship. They both had. Yeah, Paul said, his voice thick with emotion. It really was. John extended his hand. Paul shook it, both of them holding on perhaps a moment too long. They were saying goodbye to more than just a partnership. They were saying goodbye to their youth, their shared dreams, their belief that 4 lads from Liverpool could change the world simply by playing music together. See you around, Paul. See you around, John. As John walked away, Paul wanted to call out to him. He wanted to say they could work it out, they could try again. They could find a way back to what they used to have. But sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set someone free, even when it breaks your heart. They never performed together again. But in Paul's dreams, they never stopped. Epilogue. 50 years later, Paul McCartney would be asked about the rooftop concert in countless interviews. He would talk about the cold wind, the gathering crowd, the police interruption. But he would never talk about the 5-minute conversation that ended the Beatles. Some things are too sacred for the public. Some moments are too painful to turn into anecdotes. On January 30th, 2019, exactly 50 years after the rooftop concert, Paul stood on another rooftop in London. This time, he was alone, except for his security detail and a small film crew documenting his return to 30 Savile Row. He played Get Back on an acoustic guitar, his voice carrying across the same skyline where the Beatles had said goodbye. When he finished, he stood quietly for a moment, looking out over the city. "Thank you, John," he whispered to the wind. And for just a moment, Paul could have sworn he heard John's harmony, floating back across 5 decades of silence. The last harmony